For those of you who sit in a position of leadership, there are folks who look to you for leadership. I want to invite you to something that we're going to host once a month here at Autumn Ridge. It's going to be on Wednesday mornings, the third Wednesday of the month. It's free. There'll be coffee. There'll be breakfast snacks. It's 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., and it's called the Leadership Exchange. And the heart behind it is this: everyone deserves to experience great leadership, and once you do, you'll never go back. I am not a leadership expert. I am a leadership practitioner. I want my experience to be great. I want the experience for those who look to me for leadership. I want that to be great. And I just learned I can't put it on cruise control. I always have to be working on this. And so I want you to come. If you're a leader, I want you to feel really confident bringing maybe some colleagues with you. It's not going to feel churchy. This is what we're going to do. It's totally free. We're going to watch a world-class leadership talk about it around round tables for a few minutes, and then head out for our day. And so if I'm talking to you, I want you to check out the main page of our website. We have all the information about this. I'd love for you to come. Years ago, my kids and I, we had a weekly routine of popcorn and watching Survivor. Any Survivor fans out there? Anybody like that show? There's a permanent kid inside of me. I love the games. I love the challenges. I'm jealous that I'll never get to do some of those things. If you've never seen Survivor, you need to know it's got some drama. There's lots of gossip. There's lots of backbiting. Survivor is not a laboratory of emotional intelligence. It's not a laboratory of emotional health. And I love emotional health. I love emotional intelligence. I hope to have some one day. But I grew up in a home that had low EQ. I grew up in a home that had low emotional health. And I wanted my kids to start out better than I started out. I want my kids to go further than I can go. I want my kids to be healthier than I am. So one of my dad tactics was we would just watch Survivor, and when some drama hit, I'd hit pause. And I'd just ask my kids, what do you think went wrong there? What would you have done in that situation? What do you think could have made it better? I wasn't trying to create some big teaching moment, just leverage some natural teaching moments, move on, and just kind of provide a steady drip of goodness and hopefully some wisdom for them. The show Survivor, what it does is it takes contestants and it constantly places them in scenarios where they have to work together, where they have to rely on each other, but at rock bottom, it's all predicated on self-interest. You have to use the other person and the other people so that you can win the prize and get the reward. And some people do make real friendships on the show. And if you were on the show, you could make a friendship that's real. But here's the reality. You'll be at the center of the relationship. You can't avoid it because eventually you have to use the other person to get what you want. And Survivor just makes visible what's often invisible. Have a relationship with someone, partner with someone, but deep down we're saying, I'm not going to center you. I'm going to be at the center. You don't have to retreat to reality TV to find that approach to relationships. That's all around us, isn't it? Now, if we could really be honest, I would admit to you that there's some measure of that that's naturally occurring inside of me. And the biblical word for this kind of this trajectory, this curve inward onto ourselves is sin. And sin cannot be reduced to just breaking the rules. It's much bigger than that. It's recognizing there's something broken inside of us. There are things that just aren't exactly how they're supposed to be. And this curve inward and to the self, it can eventually have an impact on how we approach our most important relationships. And when we do, I call this approach to relationships conquest. It's a self-first use of someone else to meet a need or desire that I have. Have you ever been in a relationship with this person? Single people, next week, the passage we're going to go through, what we're going to talk about, it's really going to center the single life. And so if you've never been married or you used to be married, next week is really going to shine a big spotlight on that aspect of life. Today, what we're talking about centers on married life. There are marriages that start off with a conquest approach. And there are marriages that drift into a conquest approach. And if you've ever watched that happen to any of your friends, you know the sinking feeling in your gut as you watch them begin to make themselves the center, and you see the joy and the peace and the happiness spiral downward into resentment. And sometimes it's even worse than that. It ends up at indifference. And I've watched that happen to friends, to couples that I care about. And what I'm talking about, maybe you think I'm describing people you know. Maybe it feels like I'm describing something that's a little bit more familiar to you than that. But couples, they could take a wrong turn in a relationship and hit the gas. And instead of hitting the gas, what we need to do is pump the brakes. We need to pause. We need to look around. And we need to turn around. Because it is possible to get back on track. I'd love for you to grab a Bible. You can use your phone. But find this passage, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And I'm convinced that part of the reason that Paul wrote this was to redirect our instincts, to retrain our instincts, to move from being self-first to servants, to move from conquest to a covenant approach. And today, you got to hear this. This is not a dig deep, try harder message. It is not that. One time Jesus was talking, he said, listen, the teaching that I give, it should not rest on you like a burden. It should be light and easy. And so today is not intended to be a burden to you. And if it ever feels that way, maybe it'll feel that way because of some stuff you were already carrying when you walked in. I want you just to, if ever you have that moment, just pause and just think about Jesus and remember how much he loves you, how he delights in you, and the freedom and the life that he wants for you. And this is just how we are when we're feeling stuff. We hear through the filter of those feelings. And so maybe today you need to, if you feel like I'm laying a burden on you, you might need to go back and watch this again to see what I'm saying. But today is not about a burden. If you feel that, just look to Jesus. But we do need to acknowledge a real life tension. Nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, how can I ruin my relationship today? You might feel like the other person is doing that. They're not. No one approaches their wedding ceremony and goes, man, I hope I'm miserable one day. But life happens, doesn't it? It happens. And when life happens, if we don't have clarity, if we don't have a better story, then make sure you look out for yourself. We'll find ourselves vulnerable to drifting into a conquest approach to marriage. So with that in mind, we're going to read what the Apostle Paul had to write about marriage to folks in the church at Corinth. So we're going to start chapter 7, verse 1. He says, now for the matters that you wrote about, he's quoting them here. They had said to him, it is good for a man not to have sexual relationships with a woman. That's talking about husband and wife. He says, but since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relationships with his own wife and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Aren't you glad you wrangled the kids and got to church this morning? Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent for a time, so that you may devote yourself to prayer. And I just want to say, Paul, thanks for writing this, but I can find time to pray. I'll cancel a meeting, bro. He says, then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not a command. I wish that all of you were as I am. But each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another that gift. He's saying, listen, singleness is a gift. Marriage is a gift. They're both gifts. Next week is the gift of singleness. Today we're talking about marriage. Now to the unmarried and to the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband must not divorce his wife. Same standard for both. To the rest I say this, I, not the Lord. He's saying this is the best wisdom that I have for you. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer, and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer, and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. Now, we may wince at his wording there. It might feel a little crunchy. He is using some Old Testament ceremonial terms to speak to an irrational fear that they had. And there were some people in the church at Corinth that had the irrational fear. They thought, I'm a follower of Jesus. My spouse isn't. Has that somehow contaminated me? Does that mean our marriage is contaminated? How does that affect my kids? And Paul is saying, listen, God does not see you and your marriage and your family as less than. You can let go and be free of that irrational fear. Unclean and clean doesn't mean dirty versus not dirty. It doesn't mean good versus bad. That's not what it means there. But if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Now, there's a lot in what we just covered together. And if you're thinking, man, some of the wording is just weird. I wish he would have phrased it differently. If there's part of it that even feels off-putting to you, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. We all read the Bible through lenses. And if we don't know the cultural context, it can smudge our lens. If we don't know the historical context, it can smudge our lens. If we don't understand the biblical context, it can smudge our lens. And those things build up, blocking our ability to see the passage for how it's intended to be understood. And today we're going to do that. We're going to walk through it. And I think you're going to see that it is good and gentle and honoring and dignifying and rich and helpful. But there's another reason that people bristle at this passage, that some people get defensive. And maybe you've heard this passage taught in a way that gave license to abuse. Maybe you've heard this passage taught in a way that took away your agency. I want you to breathe easy today, because that's not at all what this passage is about. People in the Corinthian church were confused. This might sound strange to us, but they thought that it was super spiritual of them if they removed physical intimacy from their marriage. They thought they were super spiritual if they removed physical intimacy from their marriage. And that might sound strange to us. They just took seriously the Greek philosophy of their day. In the same way that we're influenced by popular thinking in our day, they were influenced by popular thinking in their day. And so Paul wrote this. They had quoted him. They said, Paul, this is right. A man should not have sexual relations with a woman. And they were talking about husband and wife. And Paul's probably like this. He says, guys, since this is happening, since immorality is occurring, each man should be with his wife, each wife should be with her husband. They had created a couple of problems, not because they had bad intentions, not because they were bad, not because they were dumb. They had bad thinking that was based on false beliefs. Two problems. Problem number one, they took life partners and lovers and turned them into roommates. We'll call that a no-fun marriage. Problem number two, that's unrealistic. Can't live that way. And so, because these couples had resolved to have this no-fun approach to marriage, they found themselves locked in a problem cycle. Couples would resolve to have a celibate marriage. At least one person in the couple would lose that resolve, relieve the tension with someone else who wasn't their spouse, feel bad, and then resolve to be celibate again, and the cycle would continue. And if we want to understand this passage, and if we want to understand the heart behind it, we have to understand what's going on. So single people, lean in. This is not saying, listen, if you just can't control your urge to merge, the solution is to get married. That's not what it's communicating. Now, delaying marriage might be a problem. Delaying a marriage might make a challenge more difficult. But getting married is never a substitute for developing self-control. Let me tell you a bad application of this passage. And I got to go over it because it's out there. A bad application of this passage is if you have some sort of compulsion, or maybe you have a pornography issue, to now use your spouse as methadone to treat that issue. That is a bad application of this passage. That's not where it's leading us. It is saying this, that in God's design, married people, in God's design, there's only one person on this planet who is the appropriate object of your romance and passion and affection and delight. It's your spouse. And married people, there's only one person on this planet who is the appropriate object for your spouse's romance, affection, passion, and delight. And it's you. There's no backups. There are no alternates. There's no bullpen to call up. Just each other. And for very different reasons than it was happening in the Corinthian church, withholding physical intimacy is still a reality in marriages. Sometimes it's a response to something, and sometimes it's a tactic or a strategy. So let's talk about that. First, you got to hear me say this. You got to hear that there are all kinds of understandable reasons why a marriage might lose intimacy. And there are all kinds of understandable reasons why there just won't be physical intimacy in a moment, even if one partner wants to. And there might be all kinds of reasons why there's no physical intimacy for a season. You've got to hear that. But leveraging, wielding, and withholding physical intimacy as a way to, or as a strategy, or as a tactic to gain something, that's a sign that something unhealthy is going on. And it'll eventually hurt you and your spouse. Let me tell you what this passage is not saying and what I am not saying. If your marriage is struggling, this passage is not saying, and I'm not saying, if your marriage is struggling, all you need to do is play enough sheet music and everything will be okay. We're not saying that. The point is this: don't weaponize and don't spiritualize intimacy. Don't weaponize and don't spiritualize intimacy. And so I've got a gut check question. This is one of those questions you don't answer out loud. In the recent past, let's say in the past month, have you used affection, silence, faith, or busyness as a way to get the upper hand or to punish instead of loving your spouse? And Paul wants to present a different way to us, a better way to us. Not a conquest approach, but an approach of covenant love, giving that always has the other person's best interest at heart. And this is everything, all of life together. Giving that has the other person's best interest at heart. Conquest asks, how can I get you to meet my needs? Covenant love says, how can I serve your good? Covenant love says, I have needs and I have wants only you can fulfill, and I trust you with those. But I'm here for your needs and your wants, and I want you to know that I'm making it a permanent priority that your wants and your needs are above my own. And that's the deep down disposition of the heart and soul of which Paul is writing this. That is marriage in the gospel. So he says, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. Husband, elevate your wife above you. Wife, elevate your husband above you. Just make it a permanent priority that their well-being is more important to you than your well-being. That's covenant love. And then Paul writes something unthinkable. He says, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. No shocker there. Everybody expected that. That's how the Roman world worked. A wife was essentially the property of her husband. The paterfamilias, the head of a household, he had authority over the bodies of all the people who were underneath him in the household. It was illegal for a married woman to have an affair. It was legal for a man. Not only was it legal, it was encouraged and expected. The entire Roman world was structured to privilege free men at the expense of everyone else, even at the expense of their spouses. So no one was surprised by this. But they could never have imagined what Paul was going to write next. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. And the guys who first heard this, they would have said, "What? Are you kidding me? Paul, this is a direct assault on my privilege. Paul, you are deconstructing male privilege, and you are elevating wives in a way that no one in the Roman world has ever seen or even thought of before." Because in the way of Jesus, a man, when he gets married, he happily hands over the authority of his very body to his wife. And he's not the sole one in charge. And if you've been raised in church, this might sound a bit shocking, but there's no verse anywhere in the Bible that says, husband, lead your wife. There's no verse anywhere in the Bible that says the husband is the spiritual leader of the home. It doesn't exist. Instead, what is held out for us is this vision of profound and deep, radical trust and humility that relinquishes hierarchy. And the biblical word for that is mutuality. In the way of Jesus, Marriage is not a senior partner and a junior partner uniting together. It's two people covenanting together for life, pledging to invest in the other's well-being, even above their own. That is marriage in the way of Jesus. And you got to know that in order to understand what Paul writes next, or we'll misread it. He says, do not deprive each other except perhaps, maybe, possibly, by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer, then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. Some of us might need to be set free today, men and women. This is not a license for intimacy on demand. You can't demand that. And it is tragic. It is tragic that some have been taught that this is a license for intimacy on demand. You cannot read this in a vacuum. You cannot read it in isolation. We have to understand it in context. And what was happening is the Corinthians were confused, and they thought that somehow the physical intimacy of marriage polluted their spiritual life. And Paul said, no. Don't use that as an excuse to withhold from one another. This is not a license for intimacy on demand. It is a prohibition against celibate marriages for trumped-up spiritual-sounding reasons. Everything that Paul is writing, his entire approach, is built on the exact opposite of a conquest approach. A conquest approach says your body, your emotional energy, your time, all of you exist for me. But in the way of covenant love, in the way of Jesus, it's my body, my emotional energy, my time, all of who I am is a gift that I give to you. And when two people love each other that way, look out. They are unstoppable and they are unbreakable. But we got to ask an honest and just a real and maybe even scary question. What do I do when my spouse makes it hard to love this way? I mean, there might be people who are thinking, oh my goodness, Rick, that sounds nice. It would be nice to have that kind of marriage, but if I did that perfectly, I can't trust that my spouse would meet me in the middle. I can't trust that my spouse would try to serve me in return in that way. I want you to know that Paul was not writing to perfect marriages. He was writing to people who were on the struggle bus, and they were asking questions like this. And maybe you're asking this question, why should I keep the vow that I made? What if I was too young and naive to know what I was signing up for? Is it ever okay to leave? I don't think Paul gives easy answers, but he does set very clear direction. And what he wrote next, I think he wrote understanding that sometimes marriage does feel impossible. He said, to the married, I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife. It's the same for both. Are there reasons to walk away? Yes. There's no one biblical passage that outlines all the biblical grounds for divorce, but if you read them all from the Old Testament to the New Testament, this is what you would discover. The broad categories for biblically justified divorce are abandonment, abuse, neglect, and infidelity. Abandonment, abuse, neglect, and infidelity. If you are in that situation, if that's you, I'm not talking about those today. I'm not addressing people who are in this situation. I want to talk to folks. You're not here, but you're feeling a little tired. And you're not looking for a way to fix it. Maybe you're looking for a way out. And if you could really be honest, you would just say, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, and I feel like the energy that I've got to bring and the effort that I've got to bring never results in the kind of outcomes that I need or that I want. Can I just be done? And to a follower of Jesus, if you want to follow Jesus, I want to remind you what Paul said. If that's where you are, if you're just feeling done, you're not the biblical grounds for the divorce, you're just kind of feeling done like you can't do this anymore, and you want to follow Jesus, if you walk away, that means walking into permanent singleness, unless you're willing to do the work of reconciliation and walk back together. Permanent singleness or reconciliation. And again, it's not my intent to be a burden to anyone today, but I owe it to you to be clear on what covenant love means. In all aspects, giving that always has the other person's best interest at heart. even in those moments that it's challenging. Years ago, I knew a couple that it was not good, and it had not been good for a while. And the husband decided he needed to do something different. I'm not even sure his motives were pure. I'm not even sure he had all the right reasons. He just knew that his approach was not working, and he needed to do something different. So he decided, I'm just going to try and serve my wife. And one morning over coffee, he said, "What can I do to serve you today?" And she said, "You can clean the garage." And so he did. It took him all day. Next day, he said, "How can I help you today? What can I do for you?" And she gave him, another real time-consuming chore. And just every day, he would just ask this question, what could I do that would be helpful to you today? And she would do her best to come up with the most obnoxious to-do list she could think of. And one day, just over coffee, he said, "Hey, what can I do for you today?" And she exploded on him. "What are you doing? You are driving me crazy." And he said something like this: "I know it hasn't been great for a while, and a lot of that's on me. I'm just trying to be the kind of husband I think you deserve." And that day launched a process of transformation and healing. And I want to emphasize, it is a process of transformation and healing that began by adopting this approach. And if we adopt this approach, it is not an end around doing the hard work. If you adopt this approach, it doesn't mean you don't have to do the hard work. You're still going to have to read all the books and listen to the podcasts. You're still going to have to do the things where you can figure out, how did we get here? Like, what is being triggered inside of me that leads to certain kind of behaviors that become habits that results in this kind of marriage? And how do I learn a totally different approach so that I could build something new? You're probably going to have to sit down with a counselor. I check in with a counselor from time to time. It is a good thing. Adopting this approach, adopting this mindset, it is not going to remove the need to do the hard work. It's not going to remove the need to maybe sit down with a counselor, but it will be rocket fuel if you're willing to step into that process. Your marriage needs a mission. What are you for? Your marriage needs adventure. Your marriage needs fun and laughter together. And let it come by first adopting this approach. I'm here for you. I want to invest in your well-being. Is more important than my own. Here's another question. It's a question that they were asking in the church at Corinth, and I know it's a question that some of us are asking. What if my spouse and I don't share the same faith? You're not alone, but you feel alone when you pray. You feel alone when you worship and when you're trying to take your next steps in your devotion with Jesus. Paul speaks directly to you. He says, if any brother has a wife who is not a believer and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. Be a husband to her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. Be a wife to him. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? I don't think that Paul is putting the responsibility on you to convince your spouse to trust Jesus. I don't think that's what he's doing. I do think he's saying this is your responsibility to embody covenant love in how you approach your spouse. I think we could summarize what Paul said like this. Don't look for reasons to leave. Look for ways to be a light. Don't use your faith as a license to get out of something that I know is difficult. It's a challenge for you. It's probably a challenge for your spouse who doesn't share your faith too. I think what Paul is saying, don't trump up spiritual sounding reasons as a way to run away from a situation that is challenging you. But what if instead you chose to be a redemptive presence? What if all the ways that Jesus has loved you begins to shape and form your approach, and you take the way that Jesus has loved you and you bring that to every nook and cranny of your marriage? The responsibility of those who follow Jesus is the same, whether your spouse is a follower or not, to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, to do as he did. And what it means is to do as Jesus did in the context of our marriage. I learned this from the late Pastor Tim Keller, is to do for your spouse what Jesus did for you. To love your spouse in the same way that Jesus has loved you, to remember the cross and the resurrection, that he gave his body for us. When it would be easier to walk away, he stayed. He served our well-being. On a day like today, when we talk about this, it's easy to feel the weight of your marriage. And maybe you're even feeling the ache of where your marriage isn't and where you want it to be. I want to remind you that today is not intended to be a burden. I do not want you to walk out of here with more guilt. I want you to walk out of here with more Jesus. There's a guy in our church named Ray. I am not smart enough to understand his job. I just know that he's responsible for dealing with a lot of the waste at the Mayo Clinic. And someone told me this crazy story that Ray figured out a way to take trash and turn it into gold. And I thought, that's crazy, but if it's true, he needs to be my new best friend. And so I went up to Ray and I said, man, I heard this crazy story about you. Is this true? He said, yeah, it's true. I said, can you explain that to me? He said, let me email you. And so this is part of his email. He said, a hazardous waste, gold chloride, was just being discarded, incinerated actually. Incineration is how it must be destroyed. Instead of us just throwing it all away and paying for the disposal, I used junkyard chemistry to extract the gold and refine it. And then this is what he wrote next. There was still value in the waste stream. Some of you are quietly saying to yourself, you're sitting in hazardous waste. Some of you might be saying quietly to yourself, you're sitting next to hazardous waste. Jesus sees gold there. And that is not naive optimism. That is resurrection power. And if it were possible for someone to look into the mess that you're holding, to the mess that you're in, and to the mess that's inside of you, if someone could look into that and say, hold on, before you do anything, I need you to know this, there is real value there. Would you want to know? Is that enough for you to pause and just say, Jesus, what do you see? Jesus, what can you do? And would you give me the faith and the guts just to trust you and to trust your way with what I do next? Some of you might be thinking, Rick, would have been nice to hear this message years ago, because I got decisions I can't go back and undo. I got divorce I can't go back and undo. I got regret I can't go back and undo. Reconciliation is not a possibility. Hear me on this. Don't look in. Don't look down. I am begging you to look up and to see Jesus. The invitation of Jesus to you is today, from where you are, will you let him lead you forward? Today, from where you are, would you let him lead you forward? And if you're not a follower of Jesus, but today you're kind of feeling the weight of your marriage and you're inspired, you want it to be the best that it possibly can be, I want you to know the invitation is not go fix it and come back. The invitation from Jesus to you is to know him, to meet him, and to let him meet you where you are, because all of what we're talking about, it doesn't come from white knuckling it. It doesn't come from digging deep and using our best effort. It comes from receiving this from him and then sharing it with others. You can't share what you don't have. And receive it from him and then share it with others. The gospel is good news that begins with bad news. We're all far more messed up and sinful and morally broken than we could ever dare admit. But in Christ, we're far more loved and accepted and forgiven and delighted in than we could ever dare hope. And the same Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead is the same Spirit of God who can breathe life into cold hearts, into tired vows, into marriages that feel too far gone. The question is not, can he? The question is, will we trust him? Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I thank you that we can trust you. I thank you that you can see what we cannot see and that you can do what we cannot do. And I want to pray for every single person who is married or who one day hopes to be married, that they would take all of that they're holding and just look to you, that you would see how good you are, what's revealed in Jesus by his life, by his death, by his resurrection, that something new and powerful is available to us by what he has done. And God, for those who are followers of Jesus, I pray that you would just give them the guts and the courage to take their next step in trusting him as the leader and what they are holding. And God, for folks who've kind of been on the starting line, they have not yet trusted in Jesus, I pray you would give them what they need to be able to say, Jesus, I believe in you, that you died on the cross, that you rose from the dead to pay for my sin. I give you my life. Would you give new life to me? It's in his name we pray for these things. Amen.